let's continue with Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy, still using the Hackett edition, translated by Kress. And Meditation 5 is concerning the essence of material things, and again concerning God, that he exists. Now, let me clarify, if I can, one or two things, and then try to explain what is going on in Meditation 5. First, Descartes gives that famous or infamous argument for the existence of God that we've already talked about in this series. Well, here is one place where he gives a different argument that's more closely related to the classical ontological argument of Anselm. So, if you didn't like Descartes' most prominent argument for the existence of God, well, here's another. And if you don't like it either, well, keep looking. You might find a third argument for the existence of God. Let's clarify one other thing before saying more directly what's going on in Meditation 5. The method of doubt is Descartes' strategy for achieving knowledge and putting knowledge on a firmer foundation. The method of doubt involves doubting everything that can be doubted, and then finding the one thing you cannot doubt. Well, as I keep saying to myself, I need to do this in the first person. When you're going through the method of doubt, you're doubting the existence of other people. So you have to do it alone, on an individual basis. And you can only speak for yourself. I can only speak for myself. I don't know you exist. In the method of doubt, I doubt everything except what I cannot doubt. So I doubt the existence of other people and of teacups. And I doubt everything except my own existence. I cannot doubt that. And so I know I exist. I think, therefore I am. And then I conclude, based on an understanding of my own mind and on the idea I find in my mind of a perfect being, that God exists, and that's his original argument for the existence of God. We'll give another one here. And then I use my knowledge of God to prove that other things exist, including, again, the teacup and in general physical things and a world outside my mind and other people. So once I get that far in the method, I know you exist. Descartes has not gotten that far in the method yet. We're working up to it, and I don't think it will happen until Meditation 6. Meditation 5 is not concerning the existence of material things, but their essence. It is concerning, well, you could phrase it this way. It's concerning the essence of physical things and the essence of God. And the essence of God means God has to exist, but the essence of physical things isn't like that at all. It is interesting. So now let me see if I can just say what it is that is the essence of physical things, and say something about his argument for God's existence in this fifth meditation, and then perhaps we can be finished with this video. What is the essence of material things? Well, it's that they occupy space, which is to say they are extended in 3 dimensions. Extended is the technical philosophical terminology, and that just means a thing has height, width, and depth. So the essence of physical things is extension. They take up space. And that means that the very nature of physical things is entirely captured by geometry. Height, width, and depth. And you've heard Cartesian, named after Descartes. Cartesian means pertaining to Descartes. You've heard the term Cartesian perhaps used in math class or geometry class because we talk about Cartesian charting, right? We talk about Cartesian coordinates or Cartesian graphs. I'm actually forgetting myself what noun we use to apply the adjective Cartesian to. But we do this in geometry. We use the word Cartesian to talk about things that exist in 3 dimensions. And if you're charting just 2 of them, you can have an X and a Y axis, but you can also have a Z. Outside of America, we say Z axis for 3 dimensions, height, width, and depth. So Descartes is associated with geometry in 3 dimensions. And he thinks that is itself the very nature of physical things. They occupy space, that's all they do. And as for the argument that God exists, let's not have me say anything about it without consulting the text, and probably say very little about it after consulting the text. He wants to eventually figure out whether anything exists outside his mind other than God. And he says, before inquiring whether any such things exist outside me, I surely ought to consider the ideas of these things insofar as they exist in my thought, and see which ones are distinct and which ones are confused. To paraphrase by example, I have in my mind the idea of the teacup, the idea of the cup noodles, and I wonder if they exist outside my mind. It's not just some idea of them existing in my mind. But before I get that far, I really ought to analyze what is my idea of these things. And he's going to conclude, once again, that it's, well, something that can be captured fully by geometry. It's extension. It's existing in 3 dimensions. It's occupying space. And I don't know that I want to read any details on that. Let's skip to the end and then go back to the argument for God. At the end of Meditation 5, he says, "And thus I see plainly that the certainty and truth of every science depends exclusively upon the knowledge of the true God. God is a reference point for knowledge of everything else." You know, I found those words in my old Descartes notes from undergrad. I hope they're not taken from anyone else. And I didn't remember whom I'm quoting here. Knowledge of God is a reference point for knowledge of everything else. Although, actually, it sounds like the sort of thing C. Stephen Evans would have said to his students, and I TA'd his modern philosophy class once in grad school. Anyway, knowledge of God is a reference point for knowledge of everything else. The certainty and truth of every science, that's, I think you can roughly translate that into contemporary English, as the certainty and truth of every field of study, or the certainty and truth of every branch of knowledge depends exclusively upon the knowledge of the true God, to the extent that, prior to my becoming aware of him, I was incapable of achieving perfect knowledge about anything else. But now it is possible for me to achieve full and certain knowledge about countless things, both about God and other intellectual matters, as well as about the entirety of that corporeal nature which is the object of pure mathematics. The pure mathematics, geometry that will study 3 dimensions, pure mathematics is that which studies the entirety of that corporeal nature. Again, corporeal, C-O-R-P-O-R-E-A-L. Corporeal means, I don't think the camera's quite focusing on the word corporeal. Corporeal means physical. The entirety of physical nature is what mathematics studies. And so from this observation that the essence of material things, the essence of physical things, the essence of corporeal things is that they are studied by geometry. They have height, width, and depth. They occupy space. They are extended. From that observation that that's the essence of the teacup and the cup noodles, from that observation we can then proceed to figuring out whether any such things exist outside my mind, which is what he's going to talk about in Meditation 6, where he begins by saying, "It remains for me to examine whether material things exist." So now, the essence of physical things is they occupy space, and they are studied by mathematics, geometry. What about the essence of God? The essence of God is God exists. I'm not going to go over in this video any kind of detail the argument that God exists, which you can find in Meditation 5. Let me just read something from my notes. "I have a clear and distinct idea of God. Existence is to God what having 3 angles is to a triangle. It is a clear and distinct idea that God cannot be thought of as not existing, therefore God exists." That's probably the only paraphrasing I want to do, but let's see some of his own words on the topic. "Granted, I can no more think of God as not existing than I can think of a mountain without a valley. God is a perfect being. He can't conceive of a perfect being that doesn't exist. The existence of God would be part of God's essence. God is a perfect being, not lacking in anything, not lacking even in existence. Something like that. This may be a little too much of the Anselm in the back of my head talking there. But God cannot be thought of as not existing, in the same way as you can't think of a mountain without a valley, or a triangle without 3 angles. But," he says, "but granted I can no more think of God as not existing than I can think of a mountain without a valley. Nevertheless, it surely does not follow from the fact that I think of a mountain without a valley, or that I cannot think of a mountain without a valley, that a mountain exists in the world. Likewise, from the fact that I think of God as existing, it does not seem to follow that God exists, for my thought imposes no necessity on things. Just as one may imagine a winged horse without there being a horse that has wings, in the same way perhaps I can attach existence to God even though no God exists. My thought imposes no necessity on things. I cannot think of a mountain without a valley. But that doesn't mean that a mountain exists. My thought does not impose existence on things. It doesn't impose any necessity on things. So why, he's asking, would I assume that my idea of God as a necessary being, a being that I can't think of as not existing, why would I assume that that idea means that God exists? Descartes replies to his own question, but there is a sophism lurking here. From the fact that I am unable to think of a mountain without a valley, it does not follow that a mountain or valley exists anywhere, but only that, whether they exist or not, a mountain and a valley are inseparable from one another. From my observation that I can't think of mountain without valley, it shows that mountain and valley are not separable. That does not mean that mountain and valley exist, but look what happens next. But from the fact that I cannot think of God except as existing, it follows that existence is inseparable from God, and that for this reason he really exists. I can't think of a mountain without a valley. That only means mountain and valley are not separable from each other. It doesn't mean they exist. But I cannot think of God without thinking of God's existence. I cannot think of God as not existing. Perfect being cannot not exist. Therefore, existence is not separable from God, and therefore God exists. All right, that's a brief look and not a very thorough analysis of Descartes' version of an ontological argument, somewhat more resembling Anselm's and occurring in Meditation 5. In Meditation 5, we study the essence of God, and we find that it means God exists, and we study the essence of physical things, and we find that it does not mean they exist, although we can figure out that they exist, and that will happen in Meditation 6. But it does mean something important. It means that mathematics, or more specifically, geometry, can study them. All right. That is all.